Welcome to the Advancement Podcast. Our mission is to reach the lost in America by advancing leaders and churches so that communities are transformed. Join us as we discuss how to stay healthy as leaders, work in teams, and lead change. Come on, let's advance together.
Welcome back to another episode of the Advancement Podcast. Hey, if you enjoy what you're listening to, if you could click subscribe, that way each episode every week comes straight to your inbox. If you are listening on a podcasting platform, if you could go rate us, it helps us spread the word of what we're doing here. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, go like and subscribe. And that way you're getting the content as it comes out every Tuesday and Thursday. My name is Todd Barham. I am the host of the Advancement Podcast here with the lead consultant of Advancement, Tim Ware. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. How was your Father's Day? You know, we're recording and these come out, but how was your Father's Day?
It was good. It was good. I preached for a friend who is recovering from surgery.
Oh, nice.
And so preaching a Father's Day message is good.
That's an easy one.
Yeah. Can be.
Yeah.
So that was good. Had lunch with the kids and the wife, and they, everything went well. We love it.
They get you anything good for Father's Day?
Rachel got me a couple of shirts. I almost wore one today.
Oh, okay.
I didn't. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah.
I thought it was gonna be a little cooler, so I wore a long sleeve.
Wore the long sleeve.
But anyway, great day. Yourself?
It was pretty good. It's pretty good.
One kid slobbered on you.
Yeah. It happens, but mine kind of spread out kind of the whole weekend. So we went to the drive-in theater. We watched.
That's awesome.
Hey, check this. So Jurassic Park. You ever seen Jurassic Park?
Of course.
Okay. So Friday night we went to the movie theater and a storm blew through as we were watching Jurassic Park.
Right.
So the T-Rex is on the screen. Lightning rain as it's raining and lightning outside, and we're in the car. So it was pretty creepy. I kept messing with my kid. I was like, "Do y'all see a T-Rex? Do y'all see a T-Rex? There's one that might come out."
Where did you go to a drive-in at?
The Coyote Drive-In, downtown Fort Worth.
Okay.
I gave him a free plug there, but it's there in the Panther Island area. The Panther Island area.
All right, whatever that is.
Yeah.
All right.
So that was fun. So today we're talking about calling.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been wanting as we plan our podcast out, we've been wanting to talk about the call of God, and since we talk about leaders and leadership, this call piece is pretty significant to us. And I've been having a lot of conversations with young leaders, or whether young and new to leadership in the church, or maybe younger in age. And over the years, I've had, through ministry, this is a conversation that I've had tons of times. Even, when people go through transitions in ministry, I always come back to this call piece. I think it's something significant that we do need to talk about. So let's just talk real briefly about how I came to be where I am. The call of God on my life. I was probably, growing up, I was like every other kid. You're dreaming about being this, dreaming about being that, dreaming about the other. But there was a moment when I was 13, and I had been asked to speak for, back in those days, I went to this little Baptist church, and they always we did a once a quarter, something, Youth Sunday.
All right.
And the youth one of us stood up with the hymnal and led the singing. The youth were the ushers.
Back when they had Sunday night services.
We had all those things, but we did it on Sunday morning.
Oh, okay.
They gave us Sunday morning.
Oh, nice. They gave you the prime spot.
Gave us prime spot.
Right.
So yeah. And they would rotate us through the pulpit.
Okay.
Some of us. And I got to preach when I was 13 for the first time. And there was and I remember laying in my bed that night, and the voice of the Lord was very clear to me.
Yeah.
And I remember weeping in my bed that night, just me and Jesus. And there was this calling moment where I knew that one day vocational ministry was in the cards.
Yeah.
And I began to talk about it. Of course, you go through the years and everyone says, well, you need to be a pastor. Everybody tries to push you down their road. Um, it was a 26-year journey from there to the day I stepped into vocational ministry.
Wow.
So holding on to the call of God, not letting it, and discovering the call and what it looked like and working in that call. So this has been a journey for me, and it's something that's very precious. It's very important to me to look at and talk about. So we're actually going to take the next 3 episodes and look at different aspects of the call. And now for yours is a different circumstance. I don't think you had the camp moment. You didn't have all of those kind of things that led you to this place.
Well, my moment happened at a camp.
Did it?
But I was leading at the camp. I wasn't receiving at the time. And so, I've got the musical background. My whole thing was I wanted to be a rock star.
I want to be a rock.
Right.
Who's that?
I think Nickelback, maybe.
No, that was there was anyway.
Remember, your taste in music's much older than me.
Now this would be a Christian band you would have known. I want to be a rock star is the name of the song anyway.
Okay.
But I'll have to find that later.
Put it in the comments section. Help us out.
Yeah.
Okay. And so,
there's some listener that goes, "Oh, that was
my whole thing was, I grew up in the Baptist world. I went to a Baptist church, and vocational ministry was held to such a high regard that I felt that I was not good enough.
Really?
Yeah. And so, because as a kid, I was ultra hard on myself, which really hasn't changed in adulthood.
Some things are just
yeah.
personality.
Yeah. And so I was pursuing after, I got my start leading worship at 16, and I had never stopped leading worship because I enjoyed doing it. And I felt that it was my service to the Lord. But I'd run from the calling of vocational ministry because, I felt like, well, God gave me these talents. He wants me to use them to do something, and I'm not good enough for ministry. So maybe he wants me in the music industry. And so I pursued after that, and, shut door after shut door after shut door after shut door. Finally, he slapped me upside the head one day when I was leading worship at a kids camp. And he'd just been dealing with me all week. And I got to the altar call, the culmination of camp, like every time we do when we give a big salvation, and call, what's God calling you to do? And I was in a room with about 100 kids, and 80 stood up to do something. And at that moment, as I'm, playing the mute music in the background, picking on my guitar, I heard the Lord say, see, I don't need you to be good enough. I just need you to be willing to serve me, and I can do all the work that needs to be done. And I was like, okay, all right.
So that moves you towards this vocational ministry. By the way, you were right. There was a song by Nickelback called Rockstar.
Yeah.
But
you looked it
the
up.
lyrics I was thinking about was from Third Day. Third Day has a song.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes sense. I'm not a huge Third Day fan,
Yeah,
but don't shoot me out there.
I'm not going to shoot you. That's because you're younger, and Third Day was.
Well, I went to a concert, and it was Third Day and David Crowder, and David Crowder blew Third Day out of the water. So
So anyway, the call of God. I think one of the first things that we need to talk about, though, because you just said it, vocational ministry is held to such a standard. Let's just be honest.
Okay.
In the church world, if we're not careful, we see the call, quote unquote, to vocational ministry as we can take on an elitist status.
Yeah.
We're the priesthood.
Yeah.
We're our call is more important than your call.
Yeah.
What God is asking me to do is more important than what God is asking you to do.
Yeah.
Which
you listen in on my conversations.
I've had those. The truth is, I've been that guy.
Yeah.
And the Lord convicted me of it, and He's worked on my heart in that. I don't know if this is a little older movie, but you ever see the movie Patch Adams?
Yes.
There's
Robin Williams.
There's that moment where he says, when did being a doctor become something more than just helping people?
It's good.
I think we have to remember that the call of God, if we believe what Romans tells us, that Romans is, those he's called, those he's justified, he's called, right? There's that moment in Romans 12. There's also this group of things in Romans 12, these gifts where it says where there's generosity, where there's service, where there's leadership, and sometimes we try to pull all of those in and make them where we try to apply them to just the pastorate or the fivefold, but that means that we've ignored the fact of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where everybody in the body is important,
right?
All parts of the body, and it means we've ignored Exodus chapter 35, where the Lord tells Moses, "I've called a guy who's an artisan to do the gold. I've called these two guys to do this part." It means that we ignored that Tabitha, her gift was this. She was a maker of cloth.
Yeah.
It means we ignore that what historians and theologians tell us, that Philemon was he was the financier of Paul's.
Yeah.
Well, so the call of God, I think I think the most important thing we have to recognize is that God's calling everyone to do something.
Right.
And a portion of us are called to vocational ministry.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and this is just me being honest. Okay. Yes, I'm in full-time vocational ministry, but I have found out, and this is something we teach here at Advancement, that sometimes it's easier to get work done with bivocational people, because it seems it seems to me that sometimes I run into people that are in bivocational ministry that seem to be a tad bit more driven than, and their bent is that way more than those of us that are in full-time ministry. What do you say to that?
First of all, I think
that's my perception.
That's you as the big driver.
Yeah.
You're looking for people who will run hard.
Yeah. I mean,
but
do we need anybody else? We're growing a church here, man.
I have to admit that's been my attitude for most of my life. But
I've minimized the dead bodies. Okay,
I know that. But we still need some other people in the world. We need some other people in our churches. We need some other people in our circles. I think that what you're talking about is that if we're not careful, those who come into the ministry, come into the vocational ministry saying, "I was called by the Lord to do this," that if we're not careful, we take it on as a vocation, not a calling.
Right.
And I would say the same thing about someone in a who the Lord calls into a secular thing. We had Dr. Chris Hernandez on previously in one of our COVID series, and he'll tell you that this is what the Lord asked me to do.
Right.
Oh, he loves teaching, and he loves teaching classes at his church, doing Bible. He loves studying these things, but this is what he's called to do.
Right.
He's called to be in that medical field. My son has spent so many days and so much time over the years praying about, what is God asking me to do? He says, "I don't know yet what the Lord's asking me to do." He says, "But what I do know is he's not asking me to be a reverend." He said, "My mom and dad are reverends. We don't need another reverend in the family. That's not what God's asking me to do."
I can hear him saying that.
You can hear him saying that. Yeah. I just think that we have to be, first of all, as leaders, we have to be careful to recognize that God is calling the breadth of people, not just the he calls everyone, and that no one's calling is greater than another.
So, Tim, are we saying to our listeners, anybody that's listening, we're all called to ministry of some kind?
I believe that. Doesn't matter, male, female, every age break. We're all called. Okay. God's calling us now. But now let's just clarify. Not everyone's called to vocational ministry.
Sure.
And I think that sometimes we forget that. And I think that sometimes we have to be careful that we don't come off as elitist.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just say it.
I mean, that's with everything.
Yeah. Well, okay. I was talking with a young leader a couple of weeks ago over the last month, and he says, there's no room in the world for Timothy's anymore.
Okay.
That many of our pastors don't make room for someone to learn and grow. And I don't necessarily, what I would say is that,
Give him my number.
what I would say is that some leaders in the ministry, if we're not careful, we don't make room because we have our calling. See, that's the secondary part, is that our calling becomes so important that when we have staff members or we have people in our church, that their job is to help us fulfill our calling.
Sure.
Which is actually not what Philippians 4:11 and 12 says. Because Philippians 4:11 and 12 says that this pastor, teacher, evangelist, apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, and teacher is to, our job is to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. So our calling, when you come into that vocational ministry leadership calling, your calling is actually to help people fulfill their calling, not have them help you fulfill your calling.
Yeah, that's what I tell my staff all the time. Listen, I'm not paying you to do the work. I'm paying you to equip the people of this church to do the work of this church, because if you're doing a job, you're taking a job from somebody that could be utilizing their calling in this church. And what would you say to that?
Well, I think there's some truth in that. I mean, we've often said in privacy of conversations with staff members who are doing ministry that if you don't start, our definition of leadership is facilitate. You facilitate, and we've said this. Yes, if you're listening, don't be offended, but we've said to staff members in circumstances before that if you don't stop doing and start facilitating ministry, we're going to we give them a time frame, and we're going to recommend that your pastor fire you.
Yeah.
Because you're not actually doing what God's asked you to do.
Yeah. Let's take a moment and hear a word about advancement. When I met Tim, our church was at 60 people, and now we have a weekend attendance of over 300 people. The team at Advancement can help your church advance. Do you want to see this kind of growth in your church? Then contact the Advancement team at info@advancement.cc. Now let's get back to the podcast.
Once you rise to a certain level, we have a responsibility with the call of God. I think it's very interesting that in today's world, well, your stories, you had a moment with God.
Yeah.
I had a private moment with God, but most of the time, the call of God, is this idea of people have to discover it on their own, or if it's vocational ministry, you have to be at camp. It's something that happens when you're young or in these big time moments like that. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute, but in the next episode. But I think what the scripture indicates is that we have to be on the lookout for that and help people facilitate or find. David was out in the dadgum field, and Samuel is there with his anointing oil, and David's not there. All the brothers and Paul and the Lord, and he's on the lookout. He's gone to find this guy, and the Lord says he's not here. Okay, where's the last one? Is there somebody else? That's what he tells Jesse. I think about Elijah and Elisha. Elisha's plowing in the field. Now, we don't know what he's been dreaming about. We don't know what the Lord's been saying to him.
Yeah.
But there's this moment where Elisha walks in the field and says, "Come on,
let's go."
And he kills the ox. He burns the plow. Obviously, God had prepared him for that moment. But there is this moment where what would have happened if Elijah, there was something significant about this leader walking in and saying, "You."
Yeah.
It's Jesus walking along to a bunch of fishermen and saying, "I want to make you fishers of men," pulling on the gift that was already at work in their life and saying, "There's something more."
Yeah.
So I think sometimes if we start to look for the call of God in people.
Yeah.
we can see it and start pulling on it. I
got a question for you before we go. And I think part of the problem and what I run into, hearkening back to the Timothy thing, I have some guys at my church and gals that, I've kind of said, I feel the Lord's calling you into vocational ministry. And oftentimes their first response is, well, I can't quit my job. And then I say, well, I can't afford for you to quit your job right now. And I think the problem is with vocational ministry, we think instantly to the economics, and we forget that many of these people in the Bible that we're talking about did work as they moved along, as they and so I think is some of the, and this is me asking you a question, is some of this an issue of economics? Sometimes people can't get out of their head, I can't make enough money in ministry, so I have to hold another job. And sometimes there's an economic pool on them.
I would say that it's a perception issue.
Okay.
I think we have come to the place where number one, our perception is that we, first of all, even in the ministry side, that I can't do the work of God if I'm not full time.
Yeah.
Right. Which again is not,
which you and I have both done by vocational ministry.
I was 20 years in bivocation. You don't go 26. It wasn't that I wasn't working in churches. It wasn't that I wasn't a leader in churches for all those years, but I was not. That was not the only way I got paid. It was not my vocation.
Right.
A lot of that was volunteer. A lot of that was part-time, and those things. Even so, those are not the. We have what we have done when we talk about this. If we think a little about that elitist piece, is that we have devalued ministry that's not vocational.
Yeah.
We've devalued the call of God that's not vocational. So that if someone is part-time, they're a pastor and they're part-time, working part-time, then they're less than.
Right.
If you're doing the work of God that God's asked you to do, but you're not a vocational minister, whether it be a school teacher or a doctor or a business leader or just a construction worker. If this is what, if you were Bezalel from the Old Testament and you're an artisan and that's what God has gifted you in, that's what he's asking you to do, how is that less valuable? Because last time I checked, every church that loves it when the electrician comes in.
Yeah.
The guy who says, look, I'm going to just do it for you.
Yeah.
Or the plumber, or the painter, or the sheetrock guy. So, all those things.
Love that.
Yeah, you love it. And at the same time, this is their gift. Sometimes that's what God calls them because it gives them, and if we can, there's two pieces to that. Number one, as leaders, we cannot devalue the call of God in anyone, no matter what it is.
Right.
Secondly, we also cannot allow people to just think it's a job, because if this is where you're gifted, if this is where a passion resides in you to do this, now you have a responsibility. We were Rachel and I are consulting with a business group right now.
Okay.
And we were last week at their offsite retreat, and said to a couple of the leaders that are some on the executive team, they're believers, they're followers of Jesus, and we said to them, you have a gift to make money.
Yeah.
And they go, yeah. And no, and we said, no, hear us. You have a gift. This is something God has given you.
Right.
And when God gives you something, he's going to hold you accountable for what you do with it. So we asked them, what is God going to hold you personally accountable for? I mean, that's the story of Philemon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's really the story.
Parable of the talents. Yeah.
It's right. So it's not just about preaching. It's not just about, whatever our call is, whether it be in medicine, whether it be in teaching, whether it be in owning a business or in construction or whatever it is, there is an eternal component attached to those gifts and that call that God places on us.
Yeah.
And I think that what we don't do well in the church, in the American church today, is number one, identify that looks like God at work in your life, whatever it is. That looks like God's call for the vocational minister or the vocation or whatever vocation it is or whatever that passion is. Because one of the and the second thing I don't think we do well is tell people that if that's the gift of God in you, then you will be accountable for it. So what is the eternal component that you're putting into play?
Right. Yeah.
Was that too strong?
No, I think it was good. I mean, and that's the problem in dealing with my calling, is I felt that the calling to vocational ministry was such a high echelon that I never felt like I could be good enough for, when really and truly we're all called to something.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, even if it's electrical work, plumbing, like you mentioned, if the Lord's calling you to do that, the Lord can help you change the world. Plumbing, you know, everybody needs a place for their poop to go to. And if that's what the Lord's calling you to do, because ultimately, if we were all vocational ministers, we couldn't support the church very well.
I'll even take it a little farther than that. In my bivocational time,
Yeah.
you know, I worked 18 years for the same company.
Right.
I led more people to Christ.
Yeah.
On my job site.
Yeah.
Than you know, yeah, you get those moments where you're doing things and you're praying with people in the church, but I'm just telling you that because I was living a life of faith,
right,
it affected people. You know, Pastor Rich Van Proyen said on our the episodes that came out previously when we were talking about racism, he said that God's more concerned with how we love than how we live, because how we love will affect how we live. So being out in that environment, the reality is the greatest outreach component our churches have are people who are non-vocational ministers fulfilling the call of God in their life in whatever aspect, because if they're really fulfilling the call of God, they will be affecting people for eternity.
Sure.
So
good stuff, Tim.
It makes me want to preach on the call of God.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny, because that's not a message that we hear people preach on that's not what we hear people talk about very much.
Not enough, for sure.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this episode talking about the call of God, what's your takeaway from what we said, what we talked about?
I wrote down 3 things. You know, the call of God is helping people along their spiritual journey, nothing more. Sometimes we are bent towards a vocation versus a calling. And then all calling has value in the kingdom of God. You know, I think sometimes we overvalue vocational ministry, and you know, that's I don't want anybody to hear us that we're downplaying vocational ministry.
Not.
We just have everything has its correct place. Everything has its correct piece, and if we don't put the pieces in the right place, the puzzle doesn't come together correctly.
Well, I mean, the reality of 1 Corinthians chapter 12 is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The call of God to whatever it is has value in the kingdom. And you know, should the pastor say to the construction worker, should the construction worker say to the teacher, should the teacher say to the homemaker, whatever it is, you know, we, instead of the eye, the foot, the hand thing, we can put those things in and say, oh, well, you're of less value than me.
Right.
No.
But and that's what we have to understand. It takes every piece to make it work.
Yes.
And we can't overvalue one piece over another, because it's all just a piece of the puzzle.
Well, for me, the piece that with long-term leaders, the conversation I most often have, and you and I have had it, that's why you talk about, you see this, but I have with guys the most often is I ask them, so where have you been looking for the call of God in the people in your congregation? And they go, and if we're not looking for it, then guess what? We'll never find it.
Right. But it's always there.
That's right.
All right. Good episode, Tim.
All right.
We'll see you next time.
Absolutely. On the Advancement Podcast.
If you would like to keep this content coming, all Tim and Todd ask is $1 per show. See how to give, maybe even sponsor an episode or series on the website advancement.cc. Until next week, continue to advance the mission of Jesus.